Good evening and welcome to the 564th episode of Travelers Radio. I'm Dan Schlossberg along with my friend and co-host Roger Noriega, and we're in the 13th season of Travelers Radio, the show that lets you enjoy the pleasures of travel from the comfort of your armchair.
Every week at this time, we talk to people representing destinations, hotels, airlines, railroads, car rental companies, and others in the world of travel and hospitality, from authors and bloggers to broadcasters and publicists. If it's got anything to do with travel, it's got everything to do with Travelers Radio.
And today our guest is Chris Campbell, Vice President of Strategy and External Affairs for Explorer Charleston. Welcome, Chris, to Travelers Radio.
Thank you so much, Dan and Roger. It is great to be here. We really appreciate this opportunity.
Charleston is blessed with a benign climate where summer lingers longer, so it doesn't matter much that Labor Day is right around the corner. Isn't it true that the fall is a great time to visit too?
Absolutely, Dan. In fact, I would say it's one of the best times, and it's really become increasingly popular. We really are blessed with a climate that is ideal year round. I have to admit that it's not unheard of for me to be in flip flops on Christmas Day. So you can catch some very nice weather truly 12 months out of the year, but spring and fall tend to top the list.
Sorry about that. Charleston has an enormous historical legacy, Chris. Wasn't it actually the first planned town in the original 13 colonies?
Yeah, it's the history is incredible here, obviously, and that's the number one reason that people tend to visit our destination. We actually, yep. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, your thought.
No, I was just going to say that from it's hard for me not to jump in when people mention history in Charleston in the same sentence, right? So, really dating back to 1670, and unfortunately, our 350th celebration was the year of COVID, so we did not get to celebrate in quite the same ways we had hoped. But yeah, for 350 years, our city has seen a lot of challenges, tragedy, and triumphs, and we're very blessed to be now one of the nation's, if not the world's, top destinations.
Well, Charleston later became the wealthiest community in the colonies and the fourth largest port. The first theater building in the original 13 was constructed long before the American Revolution and has evolved into today's Dock Street Theater. Please share.
Sure. So the Dock Street Theater is one of the iconic buildings, one of the iconic historic sites, and still operates to this day with a full year lineup of programming. It sits in the heart of the downtown area, the historic district on Church Street, and is considered America's first theater, opening back in February of 1736. Excuse me. And interestingly, not long after it opened, the Great Fire that the city experienced in 1740, which destroyed hundreds of buildings, did consume the original Dock Street Theater. In 1809, it was reconstructed, and many people don't realize it was actually reconstructed as a hotel. But over time, is now back fully dating back to the 30s. The current stage and the current auditorium, which were built in the courtyard of the hotel, and it has been in operation ever since.
Most Americans know the Civil War began in Charleston Harbor when the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter in 1861. Can visitors still see the fort today?
Absolutely. One of the most popular historic sites in our region that is actually operated by the National Park Service. And there is a tour, Fort Sumter Tours, which is they have the rights to ferry all visitors out to the fort. It is, in my opinion, a must-see for any visitor to the community. And part of the reason is that, yes, it's steeped in history, and it is pretty incredible to stand on the site where the Confederacy fired on the U.S. garrison in 1861, beginning the Civil War. But I also tell people that Charleston is, you got to see it from the water. And so you kind of get a 2-for-1 in terms of that ride out and the ride back, which is 30 to 40 minutes, and then the time on the at the fort, where the Park Service does a tremendous job. And if I may go one step further, I think it's got one of the best vantage points for people to really see the entire Charleston Harbor. And they have a really neat interpretive display that shows you where the different forts were that protected the Charleston Harbor back in dating back to the Revolutionary War, and then of course the Civil War. So there's a couple reasons I think it's a must see, but you can absolutely get there, which is the short answer to your question.
And extremely photogenic. I did that ride several times and really enjoyed it. What are some of the historic buildings that have stood the test of time in Charleston?
Wow. We could take the entire show to list those. I think at last count, I hear there's over 3,000, I believe, historic buildings that Charleston is home to. You really can't walk 10 feet, I say, in the historic district without finding historic buildings that just have remarkable architecture: colonial, Georgian, federal, classic, Gothic revival, Victorian. It really does run the gamut. You've got all the historic homes, which I think we might touch on a little bit later. You've got the Customs House. You've got the old Exchange Building. And then you got the churches. But right on cue, you've got Broad Street there. And Charleston is you probably aware, is often referred to as the Holy City because of and that goes back to its religious tolerance first, and also its abundant places of worship. And many of those are historic sites, and the skyline is still dotted and defined by over 400 church steeples to this day, which you get a great perspective on when you're on that tour, that boat heading out to Fort Sumter.
And we're talking today with Chris Campbell of Explore Charleston.
Fast forward a few hundred years, and Charleston has become a renowned travel destination. In fact, it's frequently voted a top city in the U.S. by readers of Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast. What is it that keeps Charleston on top of those lists?
So I cannot remember who it was that said this, but I'm going to take their words. While we're home to hundreds of years of history, we're still constantly reinventing ourselves. And so, as I tell people, we really have a unique balance of progress and preservation in the community. There's this incredible creative element that has taken off more recently. Of course, you've got the history. You've got the food scene, and so many other attributes that make this a destination that really does have something for everyone. I know that sounds cliche, but you've got the waterways, the family activities, the cultural arts, the shopping, which continues to elevate. And above all, without a doubt, and the research proves this, the people are the difference. I am biased, but I would tell you that, yeah, exactly, just a little. But the data does prove it, that the differentiator is the people. And some call it hospitality, but we like to call it the endless welcome. So.
Many people might be familiar with the peninsula of Charleston, which is considered downtown and includes the historic district. But the greater Charleston area extends beyond the city itself. You have beaches not far out of town, for example. Would you please tell us about the different parts of the community?
Yeah, great question, and thank you. So Charleston does entail so much more beyond just the historic district and the peninsula. That's often what people think about, and for good reason. That is kind of the center of it. But the metro area and the destination that we represent is actually parts of 3 counties and dozens of municipalities. And included in those, you mentioned the beaches. There's 5 island communities like Kiowa, Isle of Palms, and Seabrook, which have world championship golf courses and alongside their beautiful beaches. Somerville, just to the north, is home of sweet tea. Yeah, got to get southern there, and host the Azalea Festival every year, which is really popular. Then you go to North Charleston, which has the thriving food and brewery scene, and the Coliseum and the Performing Arts Center for our community, and the outlets from a shopping perspective, and now Top Golf, the state's first. And then you come across a different bridge, and you've got Mount Pleasant, which has iconic Shem Creek, some of the best waterfront dining locations there. And you're sitting next to shrimp trawlers that are still operating to this day and are unloading their catches right there, feet away from where you're enjoying a cocktail or a great meal. So it really does cover, and I could go on and on about any one of those or other parts, but I tell people that there's truly a part of the region for everyone, not just something to do for everyone.
Let's say a visitor wants to make maximum mileage out of minimal time. What are the can't miss things to see and do in Charleston today? We hear the list includes sightseeing and dinner cruises, dolphin cruises, garden tours, wine tastings, horse-drawn carriage rides, and even haunted carriage tours. I personally like the Sunset Harbor Cruise and the Morris Island Lighthouse Eco Boat Tour.
Yeah. You got a long list there. You hit a lot of the good ones. We're getting, I guess, close to Halloween, and there's now a Old City Jail haunted tour that you can do. Those ghost tours are worth it, and they are a little unsettling, but a neat way to see and learn about the city. But it's like a choose your own adventure. You really can't go wrong. And we could talk about a lot of different itineraries that traverse all of that region I just explained to you. In short, I think you do try to capture at least one of those museums, one of the historic homes or plantations. You have that waterfront meal. You get to see the water. You have to see the city by water some way, shape, or form. I mentioned that. Catch at least a walk on the beach if you can't stay there for longer. Check out our iconic shopping somewhere, whether it's downtown or one of our other communities. Catch a show. Again, the cultural arts is expanding almost daily here. And then to top it off, you got to enjoy as many delicious meals as you can possibly fit in.
I appreciate the choose your own adventure shout out there. I like that one.
I guess I'm dating myself a little bit,
I'm right there with you. I was going to reach for one of the books, but I'm like, no, that's way off topic.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I have any.
I do have a few, sadly.
That's great.
We are talking today with Chris Campbell of Explore Charleston.
And Chris, when you said meals to fit in, does that mean fit in by time or fit in your stomach?
Touche. That's you can take that for whichever way you want, but we promise you won't go hungry if you come and visit.
Well, spring is considered prime festival season in Charleston, but aren't there festivals in the fall or even later in the year?
Yeah, there certainly are. You've got a number of different programs that we've really been intentional about trying to bring to the forefront. Certainly spring is high festival season, but we are excited this year, for example, to be hosting the first Food and Wine Classic Charleston. So a little bit more about that quickly is this is the first time that Food and Wine, Southern Living, and Travel and Leisure are coming together to extend that iconic Aspen Classic to the East Coast. So Aspen still goes on, but for those that are looking for another opportunity or something on the East Coast, we were so excited when Charleston was selected as the destination where they would start that new extension of the Food and Wine Classic. So that's at the end of September. We've got the Charleston, and shifting gears from food to, again, arts and culture. You've got the Charleston Literary Festival, which is launched in 2017. It brings over 30, I believe it is, different authors together, but it's still very intimate and some really provocative conversations. Pulitzer Prize winning authors are always on the lineup. And it's got a real international component to it as well. So that is in November. And then one more I'd mention is a newer also festival, which is called Illumination Charleston. That's also in partnership with Southern Living, and it sort of kicks off the holiday season with some arts and food programming and a holiday market the first full weekend of December. So you've got a couple things there that get you close to the holidays, where we have our Christmas in Charleston activities in our campaign that really highlights all the way through January and the new year. And then just a couple, seems like days away, you kick back into the spring, and that some of that high season, as people think of it, with the big ones like the wine and food, the Spoletos, and the Seaweed festivals.
You mentioned next month's inaugural Food and Wine Classic, so let's talk food. Tell us more about the culinary side of Charleston. Isn't the area known for she crab soup, fried oysters, gumbo, shrimp and grits, plus something called Low Country Boil?
Yes, sir. All the above. We've got it all. I could go on and on. Low Country Bowl, everybody's got a little secret way they like to put that together. Definitely a good one for big groups. We like to say we were kind of doing farm to table before farm to table was even a thing or was cool. And it really goes all the way back to when the enslaved were using seasonal ingredients that reflected the low country and our culture and our heritage. And that is not, had European influences, African influences, Caribbean influences. And what has evolved from all of that over the decades has become a melting pot of cuisine that focuses on local ingredients and incredible fresh flavors. And it's really beyond Southern fare today. When people ask the top, restaurants, which is always hard to define what are those top five, because there's so many good ones, but there's so much more than just what you might think of as traditional. And for example, yesterday, the front page of our newspaper, of the food section, was highlighting a taste through Spain, which is Malagan, a restaurant on Spring Street featuring Spanish cuisine. Or for example, one of the newest is Cultura, which is a Filipino focused restaurant, and their chef was recently this year nominated for a James Beard Award. So we're really proud of it being a real diverse array of offerings, from the things you might think of and you listed that are some of the mainstays to very new offerings that are highlighting international foodways.
And please tell us about the various plantations in the area.
Yeah, so there are multiple plantations around the area. You've got Middleton and Magnolia, which are known for their gardens. Each of the plantations really has unique characteristics. All are worth seeing in their own right. But you've got Middleton and Magnolia, I mentioned, often thought about for their gardens. You've got Drayton Hall, which has a carefully preserved main house and some really interesting archaeology curated collections. McLeod Plantation is a 37-acre Gullah Geechee heritage site. And then Boone Hall, where they still grow crops and have really unique programming year-round, as well as a roadside market for fresh produce. But even more importantly than that, Dan and Roger, I got to say the plantations across the Lowcountry have really done an incredible job of working to advance the discussion and the education around our past. It's not always been pretty. It's been very challenging. There's been, some of those times that were more painful, if you will. But what each of those has done is created some really powerful interpretive programs that help educate and advance the conversation around the enslaved and all of the culture of the Gullah Geechee and those times that were just candidly some of the more difficult things in our past. So all of that is really important, right? You got to have, we say, the whole history. We say we've got to always be telling the whole story and the full history. And plantations, I must lift up as parts of our community that are doing an incredible job and trying to do that and really helping educate and advance the conversation for all of us and for future generations.
What and when is the Spoleto Festival?
The Spoleto Festival. So Spoleto is a internationally renowned arts festival that is 17 days and nights every year, the end of May, beginning of June. Began back in 1977, and it really just takes over all of our outdoor venues, our historic theaters, churches, you name it, with some of the most renowned artists as well as a lot of emerging artists. And it has become really an iconic arts festival, performing arts festival that people set their calendar by. So, speaking of that, I got to tell people, your viewers, to mark the calendars. May 23rd to June 8th, 2025 is Spoleto Festival USA 2025.
As a major port, Charleston was once the epicenter of the slave trade in the U.S. Didn't the slaves and their descendants establish the Gullah Geechee language and culture that's still in the area?
Absolutely. And their influence very much continues to this day in really incredible ways. The Gullah Geechee influence is found, and I mentioned a little bit of this in one of those earlier questions in talking about the plantations, but the influence can be found in our arts, our crafts, our foodways, music, architecture, and yes, as you mentioned, language. And something people don't often realize is that our maritime culture is really derived from the Gullah Geechee as well. Much of this is because the nature of their enslavement was isolated to the islands and coastal plantations along the southern coast. And so crabbing and fishing and many other maritime activities have deep connections to the Gullah Geechee.
Okay, what about their influence on cuisine as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The cuisine influences, for example, well, I would say that the way that the heirloom grains, the rice and other, many of the descendants of Africa came from rice growing parts of Africa. And that culture, translated over to the rice plantations where the enslaved were working. And so much of what they did, translated through their foodways often around rice, not solely on rice, but certainly often around rice, and other ways that they influenced so many of our foodways around seafood and other things.
I want to tell our viewers you're watching us on Travel It Radio, now in our 13th season with Dan Schlossberg and Roger Noriega. Check us out on iTunes, LinkedIn, Instagram, or the Travel It Radio Facebook page, among other places. And we're talking today with Chris Campbell of Explore Charleston.
The new International African American Museum was just included in Time Magazine's list of the world's greatest places 2024. Would you please tell us about that?
So, yeah, the International African American Museum is really a milestone project for our community, and it was 20 years in the making. That in itself, that story and its evolution is something that's worthy of its own conversation. But the IAAM, as it's often referred to, honors the untold stories of the African American journey and this is the important part, at one of our country's most sacred sites. So they were very careful to find the exact location for that museum, such that it's built on Charleston's Gadsden Wharf. And as many as 60% of African Americans may be able to trace their roots to that very site. So the power of place is a very real thing when you visit the IAAM. And the museum seeks to really empower visitors with the knowledge of the past, but also takes through to today. So it's centuries of history and that entire journey, but that's a journey that still very much continues today. And often that's referred to as the hero's journey. So that groundbreaking museum, is something that they tout as trying to evoke, feelings of joy and sorrow, right? Acknowledging those tragic elements as well as the triumph that is encompassed in the centuries of history. Incredibly powerful place. I would also note it's on the water, obviously, at Gaston's Wharf. Some of the most, in my opinion, impressive exhibits that they've carefully curated and designed are outside in a public space that there's underneath the building, and just walking and taking in those incredible elements of the museum is really, really something special. And I think it changes the lens through which a lot of people, think about that conversation, which I said is so important around our whole history.
Thank you for that,
Our
Chris.
full history, I should say.
No, thank you. For a city of its size, Charleston contains an amazing number of museums, including Patriots Point, the Gibbs Museum, and the Charleston Museum. Your thoughts on that, Chris, please?
You got a few of them, right? Yeah. So the IAM is the newest, that milestone project, but we've got the Charleston Museum, which we were important to point out is the America's first museum. The Old Slave Mart Museum is also the first African American slave museum. The Gibbs Museum of Art is one to be mentioned, and definitely seen. The Children's Museum of the Lowcountry. I don't want to for a moment gloss over how much there is to do for families. There truly is a destination that has something for everybody of all ages, and the Children's Museum of the Lowcountry is going through some renovations and expanding its programming and its exhibits as we speak. The Patriots Point Naval and Maritime Museum across the river in Mount Pleasant at the foot of the bridge, definitely ones that should be taken in. And that is home to the recently renovated Medal of Honor Museum. And then 5 or so years ago, one more I'll just mention. There's so many. I'm always afraid of leaving somebody out, but 5 or so years ago, the South Carolina Historical Society opened a state history museum in the recently restored Fireproof building. So that's another one that I want to say maybe around 2018 that project was completed, and is one to definitely be added to itineraries.
Well, we must mention the Battery, and we did, and we are, the City Market, and for photography buffs, Rainbow Row, the pastel-colored homes on the harbor front that date back to the 18th century. I know that might not have been a question, but it was.
Yeah, I think we had the picture behind Dan, right, of Waterfront Park, which the iconic pineapple fountain, which sits right there along the Battery. You mentioned some of that, and I guess I would like to use this as an opportunity to kind of speak to all of the public parks that exist, the green spaces. And there's a real emphasis around trying to not only protect the ones we have, but find places where we can expand those. And there's some projects that are in motion to do some pocket parks, more urban parks, as well as some additional county and state parks. But a couple that we have to add to the list for people to take in would be, of course, Waterfront Park, Joseph P. Riley Waterfront Park downtown, which is where that iconic fountain is. Across the bridge, Mount Pleasant Waterfront Park, and it's got a great pier, great spot for kids with wide open spaces and great playground there. Shem Creek Park, also in Mount Pleasant, which is a boardwalk across the marsh there, and one of the best places to catch a sunset, I must say. And then north, you've got Riverfront Park, which is another of the newer ones, which is actually on the site of the old naval base and has become one of the most popular venues for some of the newer festivals and other, but is always open for activities. Got restaurants there, a great spot to take in also, and is obviously Riverfront, as I mentioned. And then, of course, the Charleston County parks, and those extend across the region. Some people don't realize that there are a few of those actually at 3 of our beaches. So there are county parks at Isle of Palms and at Folly Beach and at Beachwalker Park on Kiowa.
I'm inland about 50 miles. I'm envious of the beaches and the parks, I have to tell you.
Please come
Early-
down. We will make sure you see them. I promise.
Fair enough. It just may happen. Maybe around May, you said 23rd to the 28th?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I did make a note of that. Earlier, we talked about Charleston being the first planned town, having the first theater building and the first museum. Am I correct that there are many other firsts associated with the city?
You are correct. And that's a long list. Yes. I mentioned the museums, and I mentioned some of the, let's see, I mentioned 2 museums, I believe. And there was another one I mentioned in there, the first planned community. You mentioned that. But some things that maybe aren't as top of mind for folks, the first golf course, which was called Harleston Green, Harleston, so Charleston without the C, was the first golf club. The College of Charleston, which is downtown, is the oldest municipal college in America, so another first. And let's see, I could go on and on. The poinsettia actually traces its roots back to Charleston, for example. So it really goes from horticulture to history and museums to education. And the list is long, but I'll stop there because I want to be respectful of the time for your show.
It's all good. It's all good. I do appreciate there's quite a bit to this. And as you mentioned, each question could probably be its own episode.
I promised I would try to keep it concise, but can you tell I get excited talking about my city?
Chris, we appreciate this. We really do. We're talking today with Chris Campbell of Explore Charleston. Dan.
Chris, there's so many other things to see. It would take a full week. The Joseph Manigault House, Edmonston Alston House, Nathaniel Russell House, and Governor William Aiken House, also called the Aiken Red House, among others.
Yeah. Yes, the historic homes alone could fill an itinerary, Dan. I must say, as I mentioned earlier, you've got over 300, you've got 3,000 estimated historic buildings, and that's just in the historic district. The history extends out into some of the other parts of the community. Obviously, the most historic is connected back to the historic district, but if you go back to that very first question where Charleston was founded in 1670, it wasn't in the current site of the city today. That was actually the town was moved in 1680. So the site of the original landing is now a historic site, or has been for some time, and it's called Charlestown Landing. And that's up the Ashley River. So, you can take in that history. In that instance, it's a lot about the colonial history of our community throughout different parts of the region. It's certainly not tied just to the historic district. While that is definitely has got a lot to offer to fill up the itineraries.
And Charleston is known for its gardens and parks, as you mentioned, but isn't it also true that Charleston has the deepest harbor on the East Coast?
Really?
Yes, it is. Just a couple years ago, a project wrapped up that took our channel to 52 feet. And that makes us still the deepest harbor on the East Coast. And so at 52 feet, the ships, some of the biggest ships can call on Charleston and the South Carolina ports terminals at any time and at any tide. And that's important. The tide is important as well. And it is impressive to be at those waterfront parks I mentioned, or even on a couple of our beaches, and you see those container ships coming in and out of the harbor. And it's impressive.
Do you have cruise ships too?
We do. We do have cruise ships. Now we are currently cruises originate. There's one Carnival cruise that originates here, and then there are others that have ports of call at at our Union Pier terminal. But in full disclosure, at the end of this year, the originating cruise with Carnival will be discontinued. So we will be going forward only a port of call.
Well, Charleston appears in many movies, the North and South miniseries and the 1989 film Glory with Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman, for example. And also have to ask you about the Charleston connection to Gershwin's folk opera Porgy and Bess.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of connections throughout the entertainment industry, and certainly some high-profile people that have deep Charleston connections. I'd like to touch on a few of those that really were influential in the civil rights movement and trace their roots to Charleston, such as the Grimke sisters, who played important roles in abolition and women's rights movements. Septima Clark, who Martin Luther King Jr. Lauded as the mother of the movement, and for all of her work and laying groundwork around civil rights here in Charleston County. Shifting to literature, you mentioned the arts. Some people don't know that Edgar Allan Poe spent 13 months on Sullivan's Island during his stint in the military at Fort Moultrie, and that's where he penned the Gold Bug. Yeah. And
Wow.
and then back to entertainment, because I know you're touching on that as well. You do have today Bill Murray calls Charleston home, at least one of his homes, and he is a co-owner of our minor league baseball team, and that is a really fun, entertaining way to spend an evening or an afternoon in the summer. And it wouldn't be surprising to see him out there. He very much frequents the ballpark. And then you got to get into the music, and our country music star and Hootie and the Blowfish frontman Darius Rucker calls Charleston home, and Charlemagne the God is another one who is from Charleston. So there's a lot of people with connections that run the gamut in all types of ways.
Got to mention Stephen Colbert.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How and I cannot forget Stephen Colbert. Tremendous gentleman and incredible ambassador for our city. Absolutely.
Charleston is said to be a great destination for both participation and spectator sports, even professional hockey. But I bet golf and tennis outrank everything else, maybe even including water sports.
Oh, that's one where it's a matter of who you ask, right? I don't want to get in just like I don't want to upset Stephen because I didn't get him in that first list. I don't want to upset somebody over golf or tennis or water sports. But here's the bottom line when it comes to it: you can take advantage of so many things if it's on the water. Surfing is still big. Kayaking, of course, paddleboarding, kite surfing is big. And then you got the recreational boating and the fishing. But you mentioned golf, and I have to say, yeah, that is a big one. South Carolina plays on the international stage, no pun intended, when it comes to golf. And Charleston is proud to be home to a number of championship courses. And often people think about the ocean course down at Kiowa Island Golf Resort is one of the that comes front of mind first because of the PGA in 2012. The Ryder Cup back in the 90s, and then we hosted the PGA just a couple of years ago in 21, and are excited to host another one a few years out. So we really do have a lot to offer when it comes to golf, the fairways and greens. But tennis is big. Tennis is really big, and it's picked up a lot of momentum around the Credit One Open. So when I was talking about that spring festival season, there's some big sporting events that are dotted in there as well and are definitely part of that lineup. One of them is the Cooper River Bridge Run, which is one of the largest 10Ks. Upwards of 35,000+ runners and walkers take in that in April. And then the Credit One Open, which is the largest women's only professional tennis tournament in North America, which is hosted out at Daniel Island. A incredible family experience, incredible tennis, but just they really placed a high emphasis on the patron experience as it shifted ownership a few years ago, and they just keep elevating year after year all the activities that surround that really high caliber WTA event. So tennis is definitely up there. So you could, I'm sure I've left somebody out, but you know.
All right, we're talking with Chris Campbell of Explore Charleston.
As always, Chris, how big is Charleston, and how easy is it to get around? Do visitors need cars, or can they walk or hop on a tour bus, or even regular metro transit, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, all right, from a statistic, how big? So if the metro area is about 850,000 people, and that's kind of that whole region I mentioned before. Charleston itself is a little over 150,000, and it is the biggest city in the state. We actually our community has 3 of the biggest cities in the state: Charleston, North Charleston, and now Mount Pleasant. But still, as I'm sure, as it relates to many urban communities, 850,000 might not sound like a lot, but Charleston has grown over time as it's become a more popular place to visit. As you know, popular places to visit are often popular places to live, and vice versa. So that's kind of the demographics, if you will, from a number standpoint, from a population. There is, back to your, do you need a car? If you're staying downtown and most of your activities are going to be downtown on the peninsula in the historic district, there's a great public transit system. CARTA is the acronym, that free, and people can navigate the peninsula, park their car in one spot here at the visitor center, for example, where our offices are, and get that right outside the door, and that takes them throughout the peninsula. That's free. So that makes it very easy. It's also a very walkable city.
If it's free, it's free.
There you go. See, notice the emphasis there, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's a very walkable city too. Of course, if you're going to be extending out into some of those areas I mentioned, there would be, needing some transportation. But we have, you mentioned the tours and the buses. Bus tours are very popular. It's a great way to see the community. It might be a great way to start, for example, if it's a first time for someone coming to the city. Take that bus tour, and 90 minutes or so, you get a good high level overview, and then you know where you want to go and spend more time after that. But some of those bus tours actually will take you out to the different plantations. So there are ways to tap into, kind of a network there, if you will, when you mention the tours that I want to be sure to highlight.
Thank you. Is it fair to say Charleston is a combination of cobblestone streets, white sand beaches, and a myriad of places to bike and walk, with fishing, sailing, swimming, golf, tennis, and tours of themes artistic and historical, and maybe add something to that?
What have you left me, Roger? What have you left me? I don't know. All I can do to try to encapsulate that, and maybe, man, you even got the beaches and the golf. So you covered the gamut. But really, with our powerful history, with the beautiful coastlines, the arts, the culture, the excellent shopping, and the incredible culinary scene, it really is a region that has all the ingredients for an incredible trip.
I believe you mentioned the words low country and epicenter today. I know the first deals with topography and other deals with geology. Would you explain to our audience, please?
So low country is, geographically speaking, the lowest corner of the state when people talk about the South Carolina low country. Now, you could have some who could argue that that's broader than just South Carolina, but I digress. So for argument's sake, we'll go that direction here. So South Carolina low country is the lowest corner of the state, several counties that make that up. And it literally, the low-lying areas is what gives it that obvious moniker. It's defined by the salt water, the marshlands, the pluff mud, and the palmetto trees. And it's a region that is that heart of the Gullah Geechee culture that I just mentioned as well, which is an important component of where the Low Country and that Gullah Geechee culture intersect. It's from a from a terminology standpoint, it gets tagged onto a lot of things, right? Low Country arts, Low Country food. It kind of has grown to become its own little brand. But as far as the connections there and the definition that I would offer, at least one is that's what I would leave you with in terms of the Low Country as it exists here in South Carolina.
Excellent.
What about the epicenter? Got to talk about that 1886 event.
I'm sorry?
The epicenter.
Oh,
1886.
yes.
What happened?
Yes. The earthquake.
The big one.
Big. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yeah, you said, yeah. We try to put certain things out of our memory, right? but so there was a period of time, I don't know if they still sell them, but there was a shirt that says I survived the city, survived the fire, the flood, the earthquake, and then Hugo, which does get into my lifetime. I lived through that as well, 1989, Hurricane Hugo. So yes, the city has seen its challenges for sure. But let's hope we can avoid any and all of those looking ahead.
Well, what alerted me to the earthquake was when I was in Charleston, I noticed the black steel supports on the buildings.
Yes.
And that's apparently to hold the walls together. There's another one.
Yes, the earthquake bolts is a very very much an architectural element that still exists today and is very carefully preserved. So absolutely, when you're taking in any of the buildings, that's why I encourage people to make sure they're walking the city, the peninsula as much as they can. You will see those earthquake bolts. You're exactly right.
I love San Francisco and Charleston despite the earthquake history.
I didn't know that. I'm going to have to look into that myself. That's crazy. I do have a personal question. We'll get to that in a moment, but our viewers always like to know a little bit about our guests. Would you please share where you were born and raised, where you went to school, and how you came to Charleston? And I'm going to try to silence these dogs. Sorry.
Okay. This is home. I grew up in, so I'm Carolinas originally, technically North Carolina born, moved here when I was 8 years old, and have grown up in Mount Pleasant, one of the suburbs I mentioned, right across the big Arthur Ravenel Bridge, the big Cooper River Bridge that many people know about. One of the new architectural elements that has become iconic and associated with our community. So grew up across the bridge. East Cooper is what that's called, east of the Cooper River. And my home church is in downtown, the historic district. So I spent a lot of time down here, and it's to this day my home church. So Charleston is definitely, near and dear. My college and grad school days took me out of the state of South Carolina. Wasn't ever part of the plan, but it happened. Into North Carolina and Tennessee, as did the first 15 plus years of my professional career, which was actually in healthcare administration. And then a story for another time, if you invite me back, is that I unexpectedly had an opportunity to come into this industry. And 6+ years later, I haven't looked back. And it is, and I will say this, I think my appreciation for this community grew because I was away from it for a while, right? And there's a lot of great places in this country, and I've been blessed to live in many of them. So not taking away anything from those communities, but it did give me a newfound appreciation that I think allows me to do this work and raise my family here with a different, through a little bit different lens and with a different perspective.
After you mentioned Hugo and community, a quick story I remember in 1989 when the earthquake hit San Francisco, This was a few weeks after, and I'm in
Mhm.
Los Angeles. News had arrived that a care package had arrived in San Francisco from the community of Charleston in 1989 after Hugo. And the newscasters, you have to forgive me because I still remember it. It still
Wow.
causes me to choke up. They said they had Hugo. They have nothing. And yet, of what little they had, they shared with San Francisco. And I never forgot that, Chris. When you mentioned Hugo and
Wow.
community, I'm like, I remember.
Wow, Roger. I had not heard that story. Thank you for sharing. And all I can say is that is the people of Charleston. That is just who we are, and you know who we espouse to be, and the families we hope to raise here. And um, as a community that has seen its share of tragedy, some recently, some centuries ago, that's kind of what is a great equalizer, right? In some ways, and
Yes.
that's when when we're most vulnerable. That's the times we have to reach out to one another um, uh, in the most sincere ways, and that's a great story. Thank you for sharing.
I carry that obviously with me to this day. Um,
That's powerful.
is there anything about Charleston that you would like to add? And I have a question. What is
Yes, sir.
she crab soup?
Well, I'm hardly the chef, but yeah, that's
Fair enough.
so. And she crab soup is one of those things that's kind of like low country boil. It's kind of like shrimp and grits,
Okay.
where everyone has their little twist. So I truly can't sit here and spout off a recipe because there's something unique about everyone's. And that's what I think. Also, I'll say if you tried one and it didn't quite hit right, give it another try because there are so many different ways that some of those dishes are prepared. And that's what's fun is the creativity that the culinary scene is embracing and nurturing is really cool to see how they're taking not just the seafood but so many other things. And we talked about the rice and how that so much of our culture just tied back to the rice plantations in West Africa. Well, when you think about how that's now being introduced to present day menus, it's there's some stories there that alone could take up a show. Sorry, that was a long way around your she crab soup, but if you can't tell, the cuisine it is truly an element of our culture that deserves its own conversation.
Okay, how do viewers of Travel Itch Radio learn more about Explore Charleston?
Well, I hope that they would visit, very simple, explorecharleston.com. That's the best way and the easiest way. And they can hop on there, and I invite them to please reach out if they have any questions. My information is in that About Us section. Chris Campbell. But truly, we have, what I'm proud to say is we have a great visitor information services team. And if you log in, or you do a Facebook chat, you do the whole chat function or any kind of a social media outreach, you're getting one of our team. You're not getting a robot. You're getting someone here who is happy to speak with you via our 1-800 number or via one of the digital methods to help answer any and all questions. So start at explorecharleston.com. Kind of follow the path there. We try to give you all different ways you can think about experiencing the community. And once you have a few questions ready, please reach out. That's why we're here.
Did I get the
Our
link
guest
correct right
today
there?
has been Chris Campbell.
You got
Vice
it. Yes, sir.
President
explorecharleston.com. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Dan. Thank you.
The guest has been Chris Campbell, Vice President of Strategy and External Affairs for Explore Charleston. Thank you, Chris, for visiting with us.
Thank you again so much for the opportunity. And I hope to hear from you soon so we can welcome you into our wonderful city very soon.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Roger. And that's it for this edition of Travel Itch Radio. Next week, same time, same place, same writer. We'll talk with Christine Mathern, editor of Wallet Hub Daily, about the best states for people to have fun. And of course, that will include South Carolina. Now, this is Dan Schlossberg saying thank you for your time this time. Until next time, good night and stay safe.